Welcome to another edition of VLGA Connect. And it is my pleasure to welcome back to the program, I think it might be the third appearance actually, from Victoria's Auditor-General, Andrew Greaves. Good to have you back, Andrew.
It's good to be here, Chris. I always take a pleasure in the opportunity to speak to you and to your membership.
Thank you. We really appreciate it. And you've been busy. There's a few reports that have come out in recent months that we wanted to just check in with you on. Some are very relevant to local government. Some are a little bit on the edge, but I think worth talking about. Can we start with, firstly, you've reported on the completion of the 2019-2020 audits of local government. What sort of observations or findings have you made?
Yeah, look, just the context of that report, of course, for those that may not be aware of it or familiar with it. I do this every year, report to Parliament on the results of all my audits. So to me, that's an obligation I have to the Parliament to acquit my work program to them. But I've always taken the view, particularly in the local government sector, given the homogeneity of the sector, although many councils will argue they're different and they're special, I get that. But it really does lend itself to benchmarking. So we've taken a lot of time and effort over the years to include in that report some data that councils can compare themselves against with other cohort councils, or even more broadly. And just to kind of get a plug in there for the dashboard, those who may again not be familiar with it, if you go to my website, we tabled that report in March, and go to that actual report page, you'll see that our financial dashboard is up there again, and that has all the financial information that's in the financial statements at a summary level of every council in Victoria for the last 5 years. So you can get some quite useful insights there about, things like your level of indebtedness as a council compared to other councils across Victoria. So if I now segue to the key findings, well, unsurprisingly, we were all impacted by COVID, and the auditors struggled to some extent to get access and complete our work program, as did councils struggled in terms of the resources to compile and produce their financial reports. But I think we worked together really proactively and cooperatively, and with the grant of extension of time by the Minister, all councils were able to produce their financial reports within their normal timeframes or their approved extended timeframes, which is a good result. Of course, we're hoping this year we get back to some normality and try and produce our reports back on the normal timeframe, September, October. And of course, the other pleasing result for me with local government is always that we issue unqualified opinions. People might have a view that the auditor's out there to get you, but really, I want my financial auditors to work with each council to make sure we never have to qualify your financial statements. And again, it's pleasing that we haven't had to do that this year.
Generally, you mentioned obviously everyone dealing with COVID, that's impacted on how your audits have been conducted, and everyone's made the best of a trying situation. I think the strong message, the positive message out of your findings is the resilience of the sector in adverse times is pretty strong.
Yeah, look, and there's two ways to look at that. You can look at that as a very positive outcome, and first and foremost, I think the first observation there is we're looking at the historical data, the reported data as at 30 June last year. So we're not really looking forward, we're looking backwards. But on those results, we're still producing good operating results. Our level of debt across the sector is generally low. And so that's a good thing. Of course, we've really got this year to be cautious about and see what the maybe longer term full year impacts of COVID are on council. So there's a caution there, I guess. But there's another view here, and I'm not advocating policy for local government, and each local government will make its own choices. But the level of debt is very low in local government generically across Victoria, and the cash reserves are very high. So from one perspective, you can argue that's a great thing. We're quite resilient. We're quite resilient against future shocks. Others may take a different view in terms of intergenerational debt and equity and say, well, why are the current ratepayers increasing the cash reserves of councils? Why aren't they spending their cash reserves and actually borrowing to invest in their infrastructure and their assets? So there's always two sides to the coin. It's not for me to advocate one side or the other, simply for me to observe that councils generically seem to be, or generally I should say, seem to be reluctant to embrace debt as a way to fund their capital programs.
We could go down a rabbit hole here, Andrew. We'll try not to. Inherently, it's a political issue for all councils, obviously, and some would argue the rate cap regime has really taken that decision out of councils' hands because of the way it's administered. I did notice, as I'm sure you did, the ESC has reported that no councils have applied for a higher rate cap application for the second year in a row, and with those existing applications, granted applications expiring, we'll have every council working within the rate cap for the first time this coming year.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting outcome in and of itself. It means that clearly councils, in terms of their financial management, whether they agree or disagree with the policy of rate capping, are managing their business to manage within their means. As I said, we'll be looking at the impact on their revenues and expenditures through COVID this year to see how that may or may not impact on their financial sustainability. But of course, and we won't go down that rabbit hole of debt. I'm sure it's a long conversation for another day. But debt's really just a source of funding. It's a finance tool where you simply changing the timing of your capital outflows and your debt inflows.
Yes.
But look, you're right. Your observation that it's quite often a political dimension to this, and I think a public view of it too, that where the public might have a view that debt is bad and cash is good.
That's the issue. It's such a difficult and complex discussion to have with communities. But I think we've got to table that for another day, Andrew, but happy to come back to it because I think it's probably worth exploring. The other specifically local government audit you've released recently that I'd like to get your thoughts on is the one where you've looked at local roads, and you've come to an outcome here where you're saying councils really aren't in a position to be able to know whether they're delivering value for money in this space.
Yeah, look, I guess not unsurprising, that finding. If I unpack it, this audit on roads, and we look predominantly at road maintenance and resealing and sealing as one of the major ongoing road maintenance costs, has been a part of a thematic that I've had looking at the efficiency of local government service delivery. And I'm minded about the old 3 R's: rates, roads and rubbish. So we wanted to get into roads, and we've done that. And in fact, the next audit I've got to launch is looking at council waste management services. And again, we'll be looking at that through the lens of the efficiency and the economy of the purchasing of those services and the delivery of those services. So what we find with maintenance, and this isn't something that manifests itself solely in local government. In fact, I see this as a kind of a universal phenomenon in the public sector, is that one, we seem to treat maintenance expenditure as discretionary, particularly when the budget gets tight. And now the good asset managers out there will say, well, hang on, what we actually have in terms of, we've got to look at the total cost of ownership of our assets. And the way to reduce the total cost of ownership is to make sure we have appropriate maintenance interventions at appropriate times. So, we do some proactive and preventative maintenance rather than the old let's fix on fail because we don't have enough funds, and one of the findings in the audit was that if we looked at the road maintenance budgets each year, they're pretty much the same as last year rolled over. Now, either you can posit that that's because the council is absolutely sure that it's delivering value for money, it's got the right balance between preventative and corrective maintenance, and therefore that should be the amount they spend each year. Or you can argue maybe they don't have the insights to know whether or not the amount they're spending each year is the right amount. And then the split between the preventative work and then this reactive fix on fail. So, one example there, or a couple of examples we name in the report where we've looked at some individual councils, is that a large percentage of their asset base was beyond their programmed or desired intervention level, and they hadn't been able to get it back down to the condition that they'd wanted it to, which would be a prima facie signal that they're not investing enough in maintenance. Part of the problem we found in this was that the data sets that are available publicly, the councils argue aren't that reliable. So the VLGGC data and the LGPRF data, which speak to road maintenance, quite often it was observed to us that some of this data is unreliable. In fact, we checked some of the data and we found it was unreliable. But wow, it's a bit of a vicious circle. Well, why is it unreliable? Because maybe councils put enough time and effort into getting it reliable.
Where's it coming from? Yeah,
correct.
Yeah.
So if it were, maybe they don't see the use for it, so they don't put the effort into it, so it's unreliable, and then that feeds on itself, right? So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. But I think, again, the key from this report is to kind of emphasise that you can actually get some really good insights into your road maintenance programs by looking at your own data and benchmarking yourself. So again, another plug. If you go to that report page, you'll see there's a public-facing dashboard which talks about road maintenance expenditure by all councils. And again, you can compare your council to a contiguous council, you can compare your council to a cohort council, you can compare it any number of ways on a whole range of measures of expenditure. But the other thing I'd point out for those who may not be aware, within each council, as we did for the local government audit into sexual harassment, we've now provided every council with its own unique customised benchmarking report. So that report will have the individual result for that council, and we'll compare that result for the council against, the cohort and the broader local government. So that we didn't have that information available publicly through the public-facing dashboard, but I see it as a really important service to each individual council to kind of get them onto this benchmarking bandwagon, if you want to call it that.
So just to be clear, Andrew, that's all 79 councils, or just the ones that were...
all 79 councils.
Yeah.
We got that. And, again, it's a hard thing, local government, because, I made that kind of flippant comment at the beginning that they're all the same, but they're all different. So, but there is a lot of truth in that. There are a lot of similarities. So there's a lot of homogeneity, the functions you deliver. And that, that we have cohorts of councils, for example. So they do bear comparison. They do bear and should be benchmarked against other councils. And my point about benchmarking is we'll give councils this quantitative data. And the point of it is that it's a diagnostic. You'll say, well, here's our result. We're spending, $5,000 whatever per square metre, whatever on maintenance. And this council here is spending twice that, and this council there spending half of that. Now, what I want to understand, or what I'd ask councils to do, is to understand what the differences are and why the differences are there. So you move from this quantitative benchmarking to a qualitative benchmarking. You go and talk to, I would always argue, go and talk to the top, the top quartile, potentially the top 25% of councils, or the top decile, the top 10%, whichever benchmark you set for yourself. Where do you want to be? Do I want to be in the top 25%? Do I want to be in the top 10%? So you go and pick.
But you'd accept, Andrew, that a rural council situation is going to be vastly different to a metropolitan council. So are you sort of grouping them like for like to have those sort of conversations in your mind?
I would group them like for like from a number of different perspectives. I don't, to me, benchmarking, it's a bit of an art as much as a science. And the first group you would compare yourself to, of course, if you're a small rural shire, is you'd compare yourself to the rural shires, the small shire councils, and you'd say, well, how are we going against that? Yeah. But as the VLGGC data has with the modifiers, another way to compare yourself on road maintenance is to ask yourself about the contiguous councils, the councils next to me, because they're probably likely to have the same soil composition, and so when the road base and may to some extent on the major roads have the same traffic flows and volumes. So I don't think it's just compare yourself to one cohort. I think it's thinking a bit more smartly about what would be the appropriate cohort to compare myself to, getting the quantitative data from that cohort and say, right. And I would, even though we've provided these benchmark reports individually to each council, of course, I'd encourage every council to share them with other councils who wish to engage in benchmarking. So I think you pick your cohorts, and then you go and talk to different councils. And I think you can learn a lot. I seem to remember an old benchmarking. Maybe it was a myth, but they were talking about producing lipstick containers, right? And they went and benchmarked themselves against a munitions manufacturer, because they were basically producing shells, bullets. And so there was similarity, so it's a little bit of let's be a little bit creative and think out the box about who we benchmark ourselves against.
I was going to ask you a question about observing innovation, and of course, Victoria is not alone here. It's a big country, and there's a lot of other councils in other parts of the country that are dealing with the same issues. And I did notice just this week that Horsham in Victoria is using a new technology for gravel road sealing that was tested in Narrandera in New South Wales. And it's that sort of cross-pollination of innovative thinking that I think is potentially going to move us to another level in solving these long-held problems.
Oh, I'm sure you're right there, Chris. I mean, you've got the VLGA and what, but you've also got the ALGA, you've got the roads, authorities. You could benchmark between the state government and the local governments as well. I'm sure they are adapting and adopting technologies and at scale, which may be scalable, and you may be able to bring them down to your context, which may be, a smaller scale. But I mean, that's the exciting thing about this. Technology is always moving pretty rapidly. Road condition assessments now can be done in a very computerized way, and very, very rapidly. In terms of some of these condition assessments and the technologies they apply to them. So they should be, they're available to us all, I guess.
All right. There was one more thing I wanted to ask you about, Andrew, before you go, and that is I noticed your audit of how Service Victoria has performed in its first 5 years, I think 2015 it started. This is all about digital delivery of government services. So while it might not be directly connected to local government, I think potentially it could be at some point.
I think you're right. I mean, the general concept of digital delivery of services, I think, is a feature for all of us these days. I mean, most of us want to consume, and engage with any level of government, local, state or federal, digitally, with our ubiquitous iPhones or mobile phones. We almost are building an expectation that we will do this. And of course, some of the private sector in particular, and maybe to a lesser extent the public sector, are driving us that way. We won't get into the commentary on bank branch closures, but you can see that there are particular strategies driving, and of course the strategies are twofold. I think one is about obviously cost reduction, and if the demand's not there, why would I continue to have a physical presence somewhere? But the other part of it must, of course, be about better, more effective service delivery. More customised, kind of interactions with individuals, which recognise that individual as an individual, understand their circumstances, and give them the customised service that they need. So Service Victoria at the state government level, I think, has followed some models. New South Wales, of course, was ahead of them here, and I think Chris Eccles, when he came down from New South Wales, kind of brought that Service New South Wales model here. I think that report really just said, look, they've set themselves up a nice platform, but they haven't really it's kind of an unrealised ambition here. There's so much work still to be done in Service Victoria to bring on these digital services. Now, you could argue that the local government, again, we're kind of a loose federation of 79 here. How could local government leverage off this? I think you could imagine a world, not too far down the track, where I could have a digital identity, which I establish once, which is accepted by all levels of government. And once we overcome that idea of a digital identity, my ideal world is I get onto one platform and I can transact with my local government, with my state government, with my federal government. We're starting to see a bit of that. We've got MyGov at the federal level already having some state transactions on it. I would love to think that the Service Vic model, or whichever model is adopted, could then have local government transactions on it as well. So I think it's here, and I think councils should be minded about their strategy and approach to this form of service delivery, not least because of COVID, because of the fact that people, have been working remotely and have been much more online.
I think the single biggest thing that's made people more aware of Service Victoria and what it's trying to do is the check-in procedure that a lot have chosen to use for a seamless COVID check-in. Many councils, I think, have used the Service Victoria app for that purpose, so we're starting to see that connection perhaps being forged.
And so I think, again, to the councils, the call out is here is look at this as a strategic opportunity. And look, one, again, to, with the view on cost and the impact of COVID and long-term financial sustainability, ask how you can deliver services through such a platform and whether or not you can actually save some costs in physical infrastructure and potentially, although, it's always a political issue, personnel. But more so, as I said, how can I enrich the experience for the user? How can I deliver better services? How can I make sure people comply and make them more aware of their compliance obligations? How can I speed up processing times? How can I make sure I'm getting the right information from them, et cetera, et cetera? So I think there's huge opportunity there for us all.
It's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you, Andrew. I could talk to you for quite some time about all of those issues. So please come back at another time in the future.
I look forward to it, Chris. Thanks very much.
Now, and before you go, just a reminder to people that all of the audits, the reports are published on the audit.vic.gov.au website. As you've mentioned, Andrew, you have the dashboards, which, I've got to say, congratulations. They make accessing the information and understanding what it's telling us so much easier. It's very user-friendly. And for councils, as you mentioned, being provided with those personalised dashboards, I think would be a great tool for them to be able to find ways to continue and improve.
Thanks for the feedback.
Andrew Greaves is the Victorian Auditor-General, speaking with us on a special edition of VLGA Connect.